The best way to predict the future is to create it. We live in a very difficult world. If you want the future you see for Africa, you have to create it. They'll talk very complicated medical terminology and jargon. The doctors are not trained as part of their basic medical training to communicate like normal human beings.
What would you say for someone deciding between building a career abroad versus on the continent?
There are more opportunities abroad. Some people build really good careers and others are sort of hanging in there, like floating in the system. I think the future is in African academic and research institutions.
What is one thing you wish more early career professionals understood the academic career?
I think there are those moments when you're like, okay, my dear, wake up. This is your life. And if you don't plan your life, no one is there to plan your life for you. It's those things that will cut to me at different points in my career. And so one thing I would say is that your career is yours and it's not any other person's business.
Welcome to another episode of the Scholars Table. My name is Dr Banda Khalifa. This podcast is where we bring scholars, leaders, practitioners, and emerging voices come to the table for thoughtful conversations on health, ideas, and public health. Today, our guest is Dr. Catherine Kyobutungi, who's Executive Director of the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. A Ugandan physician and epidemiologist by training, she began her career as a medical officer in rural Uganda, joined APHRC as a postdoctoral fellow, and went on to lead the institution. She also co-directs the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa and across her career, and has argued for African leadership in health and research, not barely as a slogan, but as a question of who sets the agenda and who is trusted to lead in African institutions. Dr. Catherine, welcome to the Scholars Table.
Thanks, Banda. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I usually like to go back to our guest journey. So before the leadership and the institutions and the titles, maybe perhaps you could take us back a few years, back to when you were a medical officer in Uganda. What did that work teach you about leadership that you still carry with you today?
Thanks, Banda. I trained as a doctor at Makerere University. And so once you graduate and you finish internship, your first job is to be a medical officer. And I was posted to some small community hospital that was literally at that time in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, I think at that point in my career, I just wanted to be a good doctor and treat people and just save lives. And I spent about 3 years in that place. I think I can describe my journey as maybe traumatizing in retrospect, because after those 3 years, I quit clinical practice and I never looked back. And I thought that perhaps I can serve humanity better if I do public health. And so when I left that hospital, I went briefly in a university in Western Uganda and taught a bit. They valued my experience working in a rural, middle of nowhere kind of hospital. So I was actually recruited in the Department of Community Health, and I taught a little bit community health, maternal child health, and things like that, because I think I'd seen a lot that you don't typically see in a big, medical training, hospital. So there are things to take away from that, but I would go with the positives, because when I arrived in this middle of nowhere kind of place, it was two of us. I think immediately I recognized some extent that as a doctor, this community saw me perhaps in a way that I hadn't seen myself before. I saw myself as this small, young person that, yes, I'd been trained as a doctor, but so what? I'd trained with about 120 other people. But when you go to this community, you saw the value that the community attached to us as doctors who had come to provide solutions to them. I don't know whether it's common in other parts of the world, but it was this kind of thing that if you went to church, they would recognize the presence of the doctors. If you went for a funeral, they would recognize the presence of the doctors. If you went to a wedding, they'd recognize the presence of doctors. And I said, oh my God, like doctors were these very, very important people to this community. Yeah, so I think maybe, as I said, I'll go with the positives. Like one of the lessons I learned is that I think sometimes we see ourselves as small people, but other people are looking at us differently. They're looking at us for solutions. They're looking at us for direction, for answers, for something bigger than you see yourself as. Yeah. So I think I learned not to see myself as a small, insignificant person, but as somebody who really society sees me differently. And therefore, that comes with in a way, a big responsibility to live up to that privilege that a medical degree gave me.
You joined APHRC as a junior fellow, and now you are leading the institution. Or what was the harder shift for you? Is it becoming a manager of people or becoming the person accountable for the whole institution?
Actually, it's quite interesting. I think when I was becoming a manager of people, because I didn't just move from being a postdoc to being the executive director, I went through some different leadership phases. And so, swimming from the deep end, coming to expecting to be a scientist who's doing research, writing papers and running projects and getting grants. And then within a short time, you're being assigned as a theme leader, very quickly recognizing that as a theme leader, it's no longer just about you. It was about my team. It was about the people that I was expected to lead. I had my dreams. I wanted to be a renowned researcher on non-communicable diseases. And quickly, I realized that I had to sort of split my time and nurture my dreams, but also nurture other people's dreams. So I think that transition in some ways was harder because I had to sit with myself and say, okay, that this actually means some kind of detour, that you might never become the leading NCD researcher that you wanted to be, but the institution is at a place in its journey where you need to nurture talent. And so let's nurture other people's talent and let's set up systems that work. Let's build a strong institution and sort of park your dreams of a researcher. But it was something which I did consciously. And I don't regret making that choice. I made the choice that I'm going to be a leader of people and support them, nurture their dreams. And it's okay. So I think that was a harder transition. It took me a bit to think through that and make that conscious choice. In my current role as running an institution, it's actually not as terrible as people think because I think I have so many amazing people that I work with. It's not so bad, really, because I think everybody understands the assignment. We use that term in Kenya that everybody understands the assignment. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do, so they do it. And I'm here to troubleshoot and guide and direct. It's not so bad, but of course, it took a bit of time to get that point where you're at the point where you think everybody really knows what they're supposed to do, so they just do it. So I think the earlier transition was harder than my current role.
Okay, so a little bit, stepping, aside to talk about more of a global trend now that has been going on for a long while. So there's a long conversation about decolonizing global health. But what would actually change if, for example, African institutions set the agenda and health the funding scheme that we have available on the continent?
So I think in the ideal world, what would change? This is sort of like my vision of the future. And I have to say that it's a vision that looks more likely than ever before in the current context of what's going on and all the debates and discussions. And somebody says there's a reimagined fever. So once that fever dies down, or whatever comes out of that, I think in the ideal world, I'll take an African university. Maybe let me use the example of University of Nairobi. Just from a global health or public health perspective, that the University of Nairobi School of Medicine, Department of Public Health, or whatever configuration it's called, at the beginning of every year, they would have funding that regardless of whether they raised additional funding or not, there would be some core things that they would be able to do. And what would those core things be? Is that every year they have the resources, the people, the capability to sit down with the government of Kenya, whether it's the Ministry of Health, whether it's the Ministry of Transport or the Ministry of, Environment. And they would sit with them and they would tell them, this year, these are the biggest issues that the government wants to deal with. So help us with evidence that can help the government solve these issues. And that this will be such a streamlined, automatic process that nobody needs to force, nobody needs to push, that it will be something which is sort of part of what everybody knows is normal. And they would sit down and come up with these priorities that the government have. And then now when they're raising funding to address those priorities, whatever they are. And that funders from whatever part of the world, including the Kenyan government, would recognize this as a valid platform for research and development investment, and that they would not divert from this sort of priority thing that has been defined by the Kenyan government with support from one of the leading academic institutions in that country. That's my vision. And this could be purely research priorities, maybe setting up, I don't know, biomedical research capabilities that are developing, I don't know, vaccine candidates. Or it could be that the Kenyan government wants to know how they're doing in terms of addressing maternal, newborn, and child health. Or it could be that the Kenyan government wants information about what is the best way to invest in health. Or it could be a question of how do we integrate HIV services into other health services in light of the reduced funding and the need to be more efficient. So whatever question the Kenyan government wants answered, that is actually a mechanism that helps them answer it. And then the money follows that priority that has been set. For me, that is the ideal world. And if we decolonized, I think that would be the first step of decolonization. The second step, of course, goes much further. Even as academics, we are still part of a knowledge system that is Eurocentric and that has all these other historical garbage or baggage, if maybe baggage is a better word. And so we need to reach that point of saying, okay, the Kenyan government is one layer of society, but the Kenyan government sometimes may not necessarily understand the needs of every single Kenyan. And so how do we get communities, however we define them, to also tell us what their problems are? And now we feed those problems to the Kenyan government. So whatever the communities want, then the Kenyan government sees them as priorities. And then so in the end, we have this sort of consolidated way of understanding what communities want, what government want. And then, of course, not propose solutions for communities, but that we learn together and we solve problems together without imposing our will and our expertise, quote unquote, on communities. That is, I think that will be the second phase. And I think it's hard to go to that phase without going through the first of shifting power to African academics to solve problems that governments think are important. And then after that, now try to go a step further and recognize and package community agency and dignity and solutions and, work together. Yeah. That is, for me, that will be decolonization before I retire or die.
Yeah, I mean, this is a well laid out thought on how we envision it to look like, and hopefully we get there, we get to stage one, and then move through the process. This podcast also exists, a lot of young professionals listen to it. Most of them prospective graduate students who want to enter public health degrees and public health careers. I mean, for someone who has built, your entire career on the continent, helping shape institutions, what would you say for someone deciding between building a career abroad versus on the continent? What is the honest trade-off that those group of people should know about?
I'll say this. Sometimes it looks like there are more opportunities abroad. Sometimes it seems that way. And of course, there are lots of opportunities. Whether those opportunities are the right ones for an African academic, maybe is the question. Because depending on where you are, I think it's very easy to quickly reach the glass ceiling, in a foreign country. It's very easy to do that. And academic systems differ from country to country, but there are countries where it is almost impossible to become, let's say, a professor unless you are a citizen of that country. So you might go and do all sorts of amazing things. And it's very, very difficult to progress. And some people build really good careers, and others are sort of hanging in there, like floating in the system, because the system is not built to support career growth for everyone. So there's that. If I was to advise a young, PhD student or master's student, wherever they are, I would say, look at your options. But ultimately, people make both economic and, family choices. Some people decide to stay because they think their kids will get a better education. Some people decide to stay because maybe they have health conditions and they will get, good care. Some people decide to stay for all sorts of reasons. But if you're to take out everything else and focus and think about a career, I think the future is in African academic and research institutions. And so I would say, come back, try your luck, and let's create the institutions that will serve the continent. Because, there's a statistic which shows that I think Africa has about 98 PhD holders per million. The world average is about 1,000, I think 200. And I was in Germany recently, and Germany, I think, has 14,000. No, 24,000 actually, 24,000 PhDs per million. So if you're not motivated by anything, if you're in Africa, you'll be like one in how many? One in 10,000. If you're in Germany, you'll be like one in 500 or something like that. So I think that's enough motivation. Like the value you can provide society as a PhD holder in Africa, maybe is 50 times what you can provide society as a PhD holder in a country like Germany. So yeah, you're one in 10,000. So think about the potential impact you could have the continent. So I would say come back home.
And I mean, I think there are also other avenues that people could contribute. If, for example, in their early career, they are thinking of maybe not coming back fully to settle. I think that they should also maybe try and reach out to academic institutions and see how best they can contribute to serve while they plan their permanent move.
Yeah. I think there are diaspora programs that allow that, where people come, you can test the water and see, okay, the water is warm enough, then dive in. I think those things work, but ultimately it has to be, it's intentional. Yeah, you can't sit, let's say, in, I don't know, Spain for 20 years and then just say, okay, I'm just going back home. In those maybe 5, 10, 15 years, you can build relationships that make it possible for you to come. So if you have opportunities, you can visit, you can look around, you can reach out, write joint grant applications. And if you build a good system, you can write your name in a grant application and then you just move with the grant. So if it's successful, it has to be intentional. I think maybe that's the bottom line.
Yeah. What is one thing you wish more early career professionals understood before, for example, they go into their public health or their academic career?
I don't know. There was a time I woke up one day and I thought like my career was happening to me, and I had not really thought about it that much. I think there are those moments when you're like, okay, like my dear, wake up. This is your life, and if you don't plan your life, no one is there to plan your life for you. Actually, it's those things that will cut to me at different points in my career. And so one thing I would say is that your career is yours, and it's not any other person's business. And therefore, if you think you want to be a professor in a specific topic or subject, like it's you that has to work through that. And at all points of your career, you have to be intentional and say, okay, I want to do a PhD. Okay, you can't do a PhD before you do a master's. And you need to find out, how do I get a master's? What kind of master's? And where and what? What does it cost? How do I get in? And our experience, we have people who do, we have a lot of people who we recruit and then they want to do masters. And we know you have to apply very many times, like 7 times or 8, before you get a successful master's application that comes maybe with a partial scholarship. If you want a full scholarship, you may need to wait like 3 years. So you need to know those things, that you can't just wake up one and say, oh my God, I'm doing a master's next year, and like, voila, the master's is there. You really have to cry and apply and do all sorts of things that are difficult. And then after your master's, you need to say, okay, am I going to work for 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, or I'll go straight into a PhD program? If you want to go into a PhD program straight, then you start applying before you finish your master's. So there are those things, like life. If you're not careful, your career can happen to you. Like things just happen, and you wake up one day and you're somewhere and you're like, oh, okay, how did I get here? And things just happen. And maybe you end up where you shouldn't be. So I would say your career is your business, and plan it and learn about how these things work. And and then just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. I mean, before we go to the last segment, I think we have to talk a little bit about public health communication and the state of misinformation. And I've been following you on X and the fight that we've all been putting up against anti-vaxxers. But in your opinion, what do you think is wrong with public health communication now? What can we realistically do to get back the public trust that we are fast losing?
In my view, I think there are 2 problems, and one is a quantitative problem and one is a qualitative problem. Maybe starting from the qualitative, it's taken many decades of, effort and intervention. But up to now, if you look at doctors, they still speak like doctors. If you listen to a typical TV interview of a doctor in an African country, you're like, okay, they'll talk very complicated medical terminology and jargon. And it's normal because they think everybody understands what they're saying. And they'll go, and this was an interesting conversation, but maybe it was interesting for like 10% of the population that understand medicine or any kind of health thing. Like it's very difficult. The doctors are not trained as part of their basic medical training to communicate like normal human beings. Okay, they are normal, but to communicate to lay audiences. So, and it takes a bit of, again, training and learning to know that if I go on a TV, that every word I say, put yourself in the listener's shoes. Like, does this make sense to anybody who is not a doctor? It's something that you have to constantly do. If I'm speaking on a TV and I say a word, immediately I explain it because I know that this doesn't make sense to anybody unless they have a PhD in epidemiology. But this takes time for you to train and get that point of being conscious of who am I speaking to? Who is listening? Just imagine like a 30-year-old woman watching you on TV. Really, what are they going to get from what you're saying? So that's a qualitative problem. Medical practitioners, public health professionals, majority of them don't have the skills to speak a language that people understand and to break it down. And then the second, I said, is the quantitative. Those that do are very few. And then now, this has been a long-standing problem, and this problem is now being compounded by the fact that there's now a knowledge economy where people just say things to make money, whether they are true or they are not. Yeah. They just say crazy things because there's now a whole career. You can just go on Twitter and be stupid and then earn money from being stupid. And our yeah, and many people don't realize that. And so our medical people are responding with logic. If somebody is there to make money, logic doesn't work on them. So maybe we should start being stupid in our own way and communicating facts in a stupid way so that we can also gain. I don't know, but I don't think science communication or medical communication, now the communication that would have made sense in the first instance to a lay audience, it has not adapted to this changing world where information has been monetized and people are just paid to be stupid. So it's a crisis to some extent. Whether we'll get out of this, I probably will, because I don't think it's tenable. But we need to adapt to the way we train people. We need to invest more in communication skills. But we also need to provide expertise. You don't have to, if you're a public health professional in an institution, you don't need to be the one communicating things. And if you are the one to communicate things, you should have somebody who helps you to package them and communicate them in a way that makes sense. Universities, research centers, they need communications departments that are going to train, but also guide how medical people, public health people speak to the public. So
yeah, I think that's such an important point, especially with the monetization of information, regardless of whether it's accurate or not. Mm-hmm. And as you said, institutions will really have to step up by having well-designed communication programs or well-designed communication teams to help us combat this new trend. Before we go, I usually have a rapid fire where I ask you quick questions and I try and get some quick answers. The most underrated skill in leadership is
self-reflection.
That's good. One thing you wish every global health partner understood in one sentence.
That sometimes well-meaning actions can be harmful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's deep. A book every emerging leader should read.
The Culture Map.
Okay. A lesson you teach others but occasionally forget to follow yourself.
That would be self-care. I don't take care of myself the way I should. Yeah.
Okay. The investment African institutions should protect, even when funding cuts.
It's people.
It's people.
It's people. Yeah.
And I know you've been to several African countries. What African dish surprised you?
I think I've said chepujen from Senegal.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is the second time.
Yeah, it's like, it's one of those things I sometimes even think about it. I'm like, the day I land in Dakar, actually, when I land in Dakar, I eat like chepujen every single day.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I like those big, like those big chunky vegetables that I don't know, steamed in whatever way. It's very surprising that I can enjoy like a quarter of a cabbage that has been, I don't know, steamed or something. I don't even know. That surprised me.
Awesome. Well, that's the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. But before you go, so like when you think about the next generation listening to this conversation, what is one truth you hope they carry with them long been after this episode ends? Upcoming public health professionals, academicians who are interested in medicine or public health?
I think I would say that I like some of these quotes by famous people that they ground me, but I also use them to, again, inspire maybe, as you say, upcoming African practitioners. And there's one that says that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And it's variously attributed to Peter Drucker, to Abraham Lincoln, and some other guy. And in a way, you can look at it from two perspectives. From a personal perspective, I already said this: the best way to predict a future is to create it. If you want to be a high-achieving professor, you have to, create that for yourself. That's one thing. But then I think from a bigger societal perspective, we live in a very difficult world. And being on the African continent, I think it's things are even harder when you see everything around you, you see what's happening, politics and all this. So if you want the future you see for Africa, you have to create it. There's no other person that's going to create the future that you want. So you need to sit down and ask ourselves, is this really what we want for ourselves, for our kids? That we have all this injustice and we have all this environmental destruction happening, and we have this unequal knowledge system that exploits us, that is extractive. Okay, if that's not what you want, then you have to do things to create the future that you want, because there's no other person who's going to do it. So I would say, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Otherwise, we wake up one day and say, okay, what happened? Because we thought somebody was going to create the future for us, and there's no one. So go out there and create this future that you want for yourself and for future generations.
Yeah, that's a very powerful closing. Create a future you want. Thank you so much, Dr. Catherine, for honoring us with your presence. The episode has been very enlightening. Hopefully, viewers would listen and learn, take a couple of lessons from this to better their own careers. Mm-hmm. Well, folks, thanks for joining us. This has been a Scholars Table with Dr. Banda. Until next time, bye-bye.
The conversation continues at the Scholars Table with Dr. Banda.